When my oldest child was very young, we moved to Virginia, where I worked full-time in ministry for the first time as an intern in a UU congregation just outside DC. At that time, there were radio spots, at least down there, reminding folks that all males had to register for the draft at age 18. The radio ads were filled with warnings. To fail to register was illegal. You had only 30 days from when you turned 18. And I remember riding in the car, my just about 1-year-old baby boy in the back seat. Some clever person invented these mirrors that you can attach to a backseat headrest, so you can look in your rearview mirror and then see in that mirror and then see the baby who's rear facing. And I remember looking at him, his rounded cheeks and his sweetly smiling but always a little bit serious face. I remember looking through those mirrors at this small being that I had brought into the world not without some effort. And I remember thinking, with tears in my eyes, nope, just no, we're not gonna do that. My oldest was conceived on the 5th try of intrauterine insemination. In comparison to many, my journey to motherhood was relatively quick. My polycystic ovarian syndrome, which could have presented issues, seemingly did not really. After the first 3 failed cycles, I had what's called an HSG, a hysterosalpingography. It's a test to make sure there's no blocks in your fallopian tubes preventing the eggs from reaching your uterus. It was a somewhat painful procedure, done of course without any pain relief, as is often the case for medical care with folks with uteruses. Sometimes, my reproductive endocrinologist told me with a bit of a smile, HSG is kind of clear the way. And on the 5th try, there was that small mass of barely perceptible cells. My pregnancy was relatively easy, though by the time we reached his due date, I thought for sure I was going to explode. Each breath was challenging, my feet hurt, my rib cage was just aching, my back was aching, I had reflux, and also wild fear about what birthing would actually be like. I'd always wanted children. And while I said the process was comparatively easy, and it was, I also cried every time the IUI didn't work. The emotional ups and downs were intense trying to get pregnant, and I faced the judgment and disdain of many for daring to choose to have a child on my own. And once he was in there, I faced 9 months of a collection of atoms leaching the calcium from my bones, forcing my body to create extra blood to accommodate its needs. Months of pain and worry and irreparable changes to my being. And I mean both body and mind. And that was before those cells even remotely resembled anything close to a viable child. Right on his due date, he was ready to enter the world, but I apparently wasn't quite ready to let him, because after 24 hours of laboring, after having finally taken an epidural, because pain sustained for that long is pretty unbearable, the doctor said an emergency C-section was necessary because his heart rate was doing things it shouldn't. So after 24 hours in which they don't let you eat, right, and you can get barely any sleep, and you're experiencing plenty of agony, off they whisked me while I wept to an emergency room where they strapped my wrists down to a table and cut multiple layers of skin and muscle to pull what is essentially a parasite out of my body. Halfway through, I had a shock reaction to the anesthesia, and the entire top half of my body shook uncontrollably. I told them I didn't want anything for it until he was well clear. I didn't want him getting anything in him. So they took him out, gave me one look, and then shot me up with drugs to stop the shock reaction, and I remember next to nothing for the next 24 hours. And I remember, what I do remember, is having none of that like glowing wonder and love that people claim you're supposed to feel, not even the tiniest speck of it for a while. And I look at my children now, all 3 of them at the moment, cisgender boys, and I have grown to love them deeply, though I did not have that immediate feeling. And as a result, 2 simultaneous convictions burn in my heart to be spoken this Mother's Day. First, no one should ever have to go through childbirth if it is not something they have actively chosen. The permanent changes to the body, the psychological impact of this thing growing inside, the trauma of birthing itself, no one should be compelled to risk their lives, their sanity, and their well-being if they don't want to. No one should have to explain their reasons for not wanting to, or open themselves to renewed trauma by reliving their decisions or attempting to justify themselves to those who would try to regulate their autonomy. Going backward on Roe v. Wade and other protections for abortion is, I believe, immoral and unethical. It denies full personhood and full agency to people with uteruses. It privileges a cluster of cells that can't survive outside the body over the freedom of living and breathing people. And I have to tell you that my anger is compounded, and I suspect for many of you this is true too. It is compounded by the hypocrisy of those who would protect an embryo, but who will not protect children right now growing up in poverty, without access to clean water or food or a decent education or the right to grow into themselves. My frustration is tripled or more by the hypocrisy of those who would protect an embryo but refuse to protect this earth we share, thereby condemning every living child to an uncertain future. And my righteous indignation grows each moment because of those who would protect an embryo only to then send the child it might become off to fight economy-driven, unjust wars half a world away. And so that's my second conviction this morning, embodied in the words of abolitionist and Unitarian author Julia Ward Howe. In almost every instance I can imagine, war is unnecessary, horrific, and benefits only those who already possess wealth and power. No one should be made to fight, to kill, to risk themselves. Peace must always be our goal, nonviolence our first port of call, and war an absolutely only last resort. I've told you before that I can't bring myself to say that I am 100% a pacifist, because I can indeed imagine scenarios in which war would feel necessary for my conscience. And I imagine I will feel that way until we live in a world in which no one lashes out in violence or attempts to dominate or oppress another. Even being unable to fully embrace pacifism, I have already discussed with my oldest how he might avoid being drafted, should it ever come to that. I was given the freedom and choice to bring my children into this world, given the freedom and choice to do that in non-traditional ways, and the thought that they might be forced to risk their lives or to take another's against their will. It's unfathomable to me, really. No one should have to send their children off to war. We humans can be so much better than this. Most famous for writing the Battle Hymn of the Republic, actually, Howe penned that Mother's Day proclamation in 1870. While Howe was campaigning for a Mother's Peace Day, Anna Reeves Jarvis had created Mother's Friendship Day, which was a day that sought reconciliation after the Civil War. It was actually Jarvis's daughter who went on to petition for a national official holiday that was created in 1914 by Woodrow Wilson and was designed to honor the sacrifices mothers make for their children. The commercialization over time led the younger Anna Jarvis to disavow the holiday, going so far as to sue companies that used its name and to petition the government to abolish it. It had strayed so far from her mother's original vision, the pursuit of peace and safety for all people. This year, perhaps more than others in recent times, I am reminded of that origin. Mother's Day began with a call to peace. And peace, many of us believe, will become possible when we all begin from a place of abundance, of compassion, of kindness, of letting each other be who we are, of allowing every person freedom and safety. Because peace doesn't exist when people live in fear. Peace doesn't exist when we believe in the myth of scarcity. Peace doesn't exist when we look out only for ourselves. Peace doesn't exist when we legislate each other's bodies. Peace doesn't exist when we force our religion on each other, when we attempt to coerce others into conforming with our notion of what is right, when we look down on others. Peace doesn't exist when we privilege power and wealth and nationality over the interdependence of our human family. Ancient wisdom tells us that we will know peace when all the swords and spears have been beaten into plowshares and pruning hooks. Ancient wisdom tells us that we will know peace when we stop studying war and instead sit down with one another and study each other. Modern wisdom teaches us that we achieve this by living our convictions loudly in this world, rejecting attempts to go backwards. Modern wisdom teaches us that we achieve this not only by learning from history, but by learning from one another, listening deeply to the real stories we have to tell. Eternal wisdom tells us that peace won't just happen. It's something we must build and cultivate and work for each and every day. Eternal wisdom tells us that we can't simply put a post in the ground or write a sermon on a Sunday and walk away, but rather that with each breath and in every way we can, we must bring more peace into this world. So on this Mother's Day, as we honor all those of any gender who work to secure peace in our world, as we honor those who labor tirelessly to allow children to grow without fear, as we honor those who protect the wholeness of each being and each being's autonomy, we rededicate ourselves to the pursuit of peace and freedom. Part of how we're going to do that is we're going to go outside and we're going to stand around the peace pole, and we are literally going to rededicate it. This is my invitation. We're going to make our way slowly. Ron's going to play some music for us as we go. We're going to transition our online folks to a phone. It's all going to work, I promise. So I'm going to invite you to start heading out. The children are going to meet us out there too. Start heading out towards the peace pole. Gather round. You're going to have a role to play in our rededication. If you need help, if anyone has mobility concerns and needs assistance, you can raise a hand and we'll have someone come in and help you. Okay, we're gonna start heading out there. Okay.
Together, this morning, we're going to bless the pole as we recommit ourselves to our shared vision for the world. So your one line is? Okay. Today, as one, we circle around the peace pole, a symbol shared here and by those around the globe, indicating our hope for a more just and liberated world. Together, circled here, our cry rises up. May peace prevail on earth. Aware that even in this moment, all over the world, children, elders, and all those in between are experiencing violence at the hands of warmongers and perpetrators of harm, our cry rises up. May peace prevail on earth. Aware that fear, anger, greed, and hate are the drivers of war and violence. Aware that to combat those, we need not weapons, but compassion, kindness, generosity, and love. Our cry rises up. May peace prevail on earth. Aware that too easily we can become caught up in defeatism, leaves us feeling hopeless. Aware that instead we must fight back our apathy and sense of impotence with active, intentional, stubborn, righteous hope. Our cry rises up. May peace prevail on earth. Aware that we have within each of us and within this community we share all the tools we need to create the world we seek. Aware that the road there is paved with determined joy. Our cry rises up. May peace prevail on earth. Today, as we circle around the peace pole, this defiant symbol of hope, joy, and love that we share, together we rise up and we cry out, may peace prevail on earth.